Welcome back to Yahoo Finance on the Move. We've been talking a lot lately about B corporations. These are corporations which meet verifiable standards among things like social and environmental performance, public transparency, and to help us understand how major companies are shifting towards these kinds of verifiable B corporation status, we invite into the stream Andrew Kassoy. He is B Lab Global co-founder and CEO, joining us from New York. It's good to have you here. And when we talk about these companies and the importance of helping some of them perhaps make this transition, there are already big names out there. We were talking in the commercial break, for instance, Dannon. I would know Dannon Yogurt. Can you tell us more about those who want to make this switch and why they should?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Adam. The B Corp movement has been around for about 15 years. It's made up of over 3,500 companies around the world who've met those higher standards that you just talked about. But until the last couple of years, most of those companies were private, often venture or private equity funded, but not necessarily large public multinationals. The bar for certification is very high, and so it's been a challenge for some of those companies to meet that bar. Companies like Danone have started themselves on that journey, and Natura, which is a large Brazilian cosmetics company, is already a certified B Corporation, but we wanted to find a way to engage all public companies in being a part of changing our economic system. And so this last week, we launched what we call B Movement Builders, which is an opportunity for large multinationals who've been inspired by the leadership of the B Corp community to take part in stakeholder capitalism.
Andrew, it's Julie here. It's good to see you again. Just for those who are not as familiar with the B Corp certification, just to give them a little idea here, as opposed to the traditional legal certification of a public company, which has to put shareholders and profits first, a B Corporation has to consider legally the sort of broader community. And as you say, you're reaching out to these larger public corporations. Besides those that you mentioned, are you getting much traction yet? Because we have seen, despite a lot of talk, particularly during this pandemic, despite the business roundtables change in mandate to include stakeholder capitalism, we have not seen a lot of large public companies make the switch in certification. Do you think that is going to change? And what's the big stumbling block?
Well, for a long time, the stumbling block was that idea of stakeholder governance, that large corporations were worried that their investors wouldn't accept the idea that they could make themselves accountable to consider their workers, their communities, the environment when making decisions. I think the BRT announcement last fall helped change the culture of people's thinking about that. And COVID, I think, has actually accelerated that sense that large corporations need to be accountable to a larger number of stakeholders, this idea of stakeholder capitalism. So we have seen a sea change just in the last 6 months. A couple of public companies, Amalgamated Bank and Danone, actually took shareholder votes where they got 99% plus approval from their shareholders to make themselves legally accountable to consider the interests of their stakeholders. Two companies this summer had very successful IPOs, Lemonade and then Vital Farms, as B corporations with that kind of stakeholder governance in place. So we've seen a sea change, I think, in that in the capital markets.
Andrew, it's Julia LaRoche, and I hear you on that. It's interesting because I would be curious where you're kind of seeing the driving force. Is it from consumers? Is it from the young generation of talent that wants to work at these companies,
right?
The shareholder base that's really pushing for the changes, and how do you kind of keep that inertia going?
Well, I think it's actually all of those things. There are more and more investors who recognize that their long-term interest is in seeing a society that is stable, that has strong economic growth, and that there is inclusive economic growth. As long-term investors. And so they are more and more focused on making sure that the companies that they invest in their portfolios are considering these kinds of interests of their own workers as well as communities and the environment. Consumers care more and more about these issues. And I think there's an incredible amount of pressure from workers inside of these companies as companies fight for talent. People want to work for companies that reflect their values. So all of those things, I think, are driving that shift, as well as, I would say, a sense that government is not as functional as it should be, and a need for business to step up.
Andrew Kassoy is B Lab Global co-founder and CEO. Thank you for joining us here on The Move.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.